Hello and welcome back to Factorio. My name is Nasty. In the last video I said this was the last of this mini-series, but I've got one more addition to talk through. So, I've been reflecting recently on the fact that that I'm constantly the editor, constantly making changes, small tweaks to the base, constantly over time. And over time, as you continue to make optimizations to all your designs, you sometimes lose sight of ultimately, how much improvements have been made to the base. Because if I look back at the last 9 months of creating content here on YouTube, I haven't actually scaled up my base at all. I have scaled up the ability to make Prometheum science, which is kind of the conclusion of this series here. But other than that, everything is effectively the same in terms of the target values that we're hitting, right? So the goal has always been for all the sciences, ignoring the ESPM number because it's kind of irrelevant here because it's just time-based in this case. I've been targeting for about, in this case, 16 belts of science has been my target, right? So for uncommon, we wind up doing 8 belts of science. For legendary, it's some fraction of that. It's 640 science per second for legendary, right? But across all the different sciences, that's been the goal. And if you look at, all of time here, even going back 1,000 hours, nothing has really even changed in terms of the consumption rates, right? So, if I look at blue, the only difference is if we're running 60-second research or we're running research productivity. And then that's it. Those are the two numbers that exist over all of time. Now, the metric that I care about is not so much the number, because we can continue to copy and paste the same designs once we have kind of come up with what the best designs are. What I care a lot more about is what is this top number here on the right hand corner as we're doing any of these individual researches, right? So I have kind of a unique opportunity because I haven't actually scaled up my base and I've only been focusing on UPS optimizations. And the exciting part is what I want to do is I want to take that Megabase that I originally created a video for. It's the very first video on my channel, where I debuted this base and what its capabilities were and what the target was. And I want to benchmark that base compared to the current latest version that I have, and just compare and contrast and see what are the UPS gains that we've had over 9 months of researching, exploring, optimizing, tweaking as a community, and seeing what that looks like. So let's zoom way out here. And what I'll do also, just for the own dramatic effect of what happens here, let me go ahead and turn pollution on. And what I'll do is I'll take you now back to that old base so that we can go and see it. And I can talk about some of the complete changes that exist since back then. And then we'll follow up the video with a nice benchmark. Blast from the past. This is taking us all the way back to May 18th of 2025, so almost 9 months ago to be exact. So, as you can see, there's a lot of difference immediately from the red pollution cloud that existed here. Got a nice video on talking about managing pollution and a lot of the things that we've done to improve the actual pollution cloud that we have here. But we'll go ahead and turn that off, and we'll focus a little bit on some of the old designs and the old labs and everything that existed here. So I'll make this as short and sweet as possible, as I don't want to waste your time on this. The old lab, and this was the old video from the original base, this is the actual setup that we have here. You can see all the original labs that were not the 16 beaconed nice labs that we have. They were 13 beaconed and used a really simple clock generator or not clock, but just a 2-tick on every once in a while for bulk inserters that would turn on and grab things from a belt. Ultimately, this was the main setup. Back then, we had a huge amount of farms that I ultimately shut down because they were too expensive at the time. And ultimately, we've learned over time that actually me having left all these trees to be constantly dying was one of the most expensive UPS decisions I possibly could have made. So actually pruning all these trees and removing them was actually a huge improvement. Back then, military science was a lot different. We had some relatively interesting choices with directly putting things into a silo and then maximizing the amount of walls that we wind up creating from there. And then ultimately this was reworked over multiple different episodes, and we wound up getting a better design. Talk about just overkill on copper production here. We have nowhere near that kind of requirement for this particular base, right? 61 per second, and we're producing up here a total of 559 potentially, right? So just way overkill for a lot of things. And that was kind of a common pattern back then. I used a lot of these, like, there's a lot of things haven't changed. We've just optimized all of these upcyclers that actually produce the raw ore and ratioed things more appropriately. We've, since then, some things that just have changed in general is we've completely removed our defensive walls, as we no longer rely on defenses here on Novice, as we've completely managed pollution ourselves. We have the very old green design, which is a monstrosity that I never want to think about ever again. Just talking about just abuse of silo chests to the absolute extreme. Look at those wakelets, everybody. That's that is it's unacceptable nowadays by today's standards. So there's balancers going on all over the place. And if you think about it too, like, this whole base was built in about 3 months, right? So this wasn't a very, like, this wasn't, in terms of, like, actual time investment, is about a third of the time that we've spent since then actually optimizing things. That's kind of how it normally works out. We don't have any of the solar panels, and we have some solar farms, but not much, but we're still relying fully on reactor setups here. We still have the good old starter base that has not changed at all in all of this time. This is exactly the same as it was back then, 9 months later, which I should probably think about revisiting, but that is still exactly the same. The interesting parts are these chemical science upcyclers here, which were very overkill, which I've optimized in a couple different videos, and we definitely got a much better Q2 design than a lot of these concepts that exist, and you just, again, just looking at it, just wakeless all over the place in terms of not properly clocking things, trying to use lead follower as much as possible, so just a lot of changes that have changed over time. One of the core mechanics back then that I was employing a lot was just reading the contents of the individual inserter or the individual assembly machine. So this was before the days of actually having talked through and figured out how lead follower works, or even the much more complicated clocking methods that are now commonplace all over my base. So this was a core concept. Back then, one of the thought processes that I had was, hey, we should be going and monitoring the circuit network, and that's cheaper than wakelists. And although here the wakelists are kind of gone, the nice part is that we're just, we can guard that by just using circuit control. But it's not as good, as we found out over time, compared to other strategies that we've come up. So clocking has significantly improved since back when I was first exploring all of this. We've definitely mastered stack inserters at this point. Well, mostly. We're close. Utility science is, for the most part, unchanged. There's some overall, like, I've mainly changed the head layout here, but most of this stuff is almost identical with some changes. We've reduced almost all of the wakelists and proper ratio things, but this is about the same. One day I'll do a full proper redesign of that. Purple Science has undergone significant changes. There was definitely an overkill amount of steel furnaces that were used here. Not clocking things, you can see the wake lists are active, but it's actually because we're monitoring each individual electric furnace and turning them on and off. This is better in general because it always creates a constant back pressure, and you can assume that. But the overall having one global clock for all of them, which is what you find now in my Purple Science design, is significantly better than just doing individual small little circuit networks across everything. This needed to go. This was a terrible design choice of just silo chesting. Look at all those inserters with the constant flickering that's going on to get them to transport from a belt all of the items across this silo buffer. So quite a concept. So overall, that's kind of Novice. Let me go revisit how I was doing Red Science. Yeah, again, lots of wake lists, so definitely have significantly improved this design since then. But an interesting concept nonetheless of getting us to this original base and what we've seen. So let's go explore a couple other of the overall planets, and I'll try to do as good as I can of doing a transition back and forth between these planets here. This is Vulcanus. One of the big things immediately when I look at this, knowing what I know now, is all this RoboPort coverage that's here should immediately get removed. The chart update time that's here, and this is general UPS advisory, Having lots of stuff constantly actively being scanned across the chart with radars, or especially just with roboports, is going to have a cost for UPS. So that chart update time being about 0.2 milliseconds was drastically reduced in the new base by just not having as much under radar coverage. So that's a huge difference. In general, I've already talked about it, but the Vulcanist science was redesigned, but you can see even up until this last video, this was exactly the same. There's the silo chesting that was going on, and this design works really good when you have a measly 8,000 mining productivity compared to the 24,000 that I have now, but has seen so this is very viable if you're at a lower mining productivity level. I understand that a lot of you will go and wind up saying 8,000 is already an absurd number, and I will agree with you. So that is a thing that you can wind up doing. You can see that this was the old Vulcanist setup. Otherwise, the core of this base here has stayed about the same here in this area, which is one day a refactor that I should definitely do. But definitely some overkill designs in terms of the tungsten carbide, and then a significant amount of actual export here. It's about the same, but the difference is that the bots had to fly across all over the place to deliver those parts. One very big difference here is that you'll notice that there's only 2 ships, and these are my old ship designs that I had for doing Prometheum science. And one of the big differences that existed back here is that we didn't have, at this point in time, really the ability to run. We had, like, maybe we could run about 32,000 Prometheum science per minute, but that was it, and that was as far as we could go. So at that time, like, the research productivity wasn't a goal of mine, as it is now to be able to have it at half speed of everything else. It was an eventual goal, but I hadn't quite gotten there yet because I needed to go and optimize everything else that was across all the other planets, right? So Prometheum science here could cap out at a maximum of 32k per minute. So what that, or about, let's say 36,000, I think, because 18,000 was what these were targeted at. Over time, I improved them to bump them to the maximum that you could probably get with this kind of a setup, which is about 20,000 on average per minute. And that was basically the state of Prometheum science back then. So I could run about 500,000 science per minute, effective science per minute, at the research productivity level that I was at back then. So having scaled that 5 times in terms of capacity, and getting from 32,000 up to 115,200. Let's do the math right now. That's a 3x scaling factor since this video was originally released. So unfortunately, I can't really do a research productivity demo in terms of testing one versus the other because it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. However, we can test every other science. So what I want to test is I want to do mining productivity. I want to do physical projectile damage, so we do a 6 science for that. Then I want to do also worker robot speed to see how much better that is. And then we'll do one of the orange sciences, so I think I'll wind up picking artillery shell range, and just choosing that as the science so we get some orange science in there. Talk through quickly some of the other planets. So white science has significantly changed. You can see just the number of wakelists just literally everywhere, and how that has definitely changed over time. We wind up having here for white science that it would wind up, one of the big differences that exists here when you're running this is that this ship had a lot that had no clocking going on for any of these asteroid collectors. We were using lasers back then. That was a very heavy usage for all the interplanetary transports, was using lasers. And that was kind of considered to be a cheaper option back then, but we've learned over time that that's way more expensive for UPS. So removing that was a big deal, and in terms of making things better. A lot of the ships that I was running back then, just in general, the transport ships to bring back and forth science, was all using lasers as well, which we've completely changed over to using just traditional turrets because they're just cheaper. And then since we're unloading right now some of the pink stuff, let's go talk about Fulgora. This design, until I wound up adopting Klux's design, has remained unchanged. This was, at the time, one of the first non-cheesy mechanics based version of Q2 Science. At the time, you had wound up coming up with already a Q2 Science version which used railguns and biter eggs to void materials. And then over time, that's obviously been significantly refined to wind up creating a design that ultimately can use trains. But back then, one of the big discoveries for me was that I realized that with the actual ratios, and in this case we're belting things, and the future better designs wound up actually going and directly inserting and then voiding with trains. But back then, this was the discovery that I realized that at ratio, you actually produce enough materials by quality upcycling to produce a constant amount for 330 science per second of the beautiful pink stuff, the electromagnetic science packs. So that was at the time, not something that we had really realized, and it's interesting to see that the meta has completely shifted to now using quality science on other planets. Speaking of quality science on other planets, Aquilo was much larger than it is now, because at the time I was really shooting for getting up the railgun shooting speed until you can see here that I stopped midway through when a bug fix came out to cap it at, I think it's 12 now is the highest railgun shooting speed you have to realistically research. So at the time, I had optimized this for 8 full lanes of Aquila science, but I've gone down to 4 because we have no longer the need for that. But again, and I've touched on this in other videos, the last previous video where I did a complete redesign of this basically covers all my thoughts on there. So this has stayed mostly the same until I recently just refactored it. So, let's see. Gleba I also talked about. This was almost also identically unchanged until the recent, in this series where I talked about the first episode where I talked about Gleba. So go check that out if you want my in-depth thoughts on why I changed what I changed and how I improved freshness over time. At that time as well, because we were only running 2 ships back and forth for Gleba Science, we were not able to actually run full speed Gleba Science. That was also a limitation, which we've fixed over time as well. Pollution cloud wise, we've grown definitely in terms of pollution cloud on Gleba, but we utilize it a lot more, so that's also a net difference. So now the question that I would have is, okay, so compared to this old base and what we had back then, how much of a UPS improvement have we seen in all the tiny little changes that I've shown on camera, off camera, all the different changes that ultimately go into making the base better? From the lab redesign to the individual sciences, which are almost all completely different since back then, all the planet redesigns, with the exception of well, actually, without exception, every single planet has completely changed the way that we make science. How much of an improvement have we made to the overall base and what our UPS numbers are before and after? So with that, I'm going to go and record a whole bunch of background footage so I can go and show all the results of the overlay after I go run all those tests. So I'll be back in a second. So I was just going over the benchmark results and I found like a really weird inconsistency. So I'll show that now to y'all. So when I was going through these, you can see that there's effectively I have like a save file for each of them. So mining productivity, physical projectile damage, and that's what those mean. The ASR is like artillery shell range, etc. When I was looking through those, I started to look at this and I said, like, okay, let's look at the whole update time variant. So this is the 2025 base that I had. Why is physical projectile damage, which is a 6-second science research, better than mining productivity? I was like, okay, well, let's go and look at the mining productivity chart that we have. And oh, there's this huge amount of entity update time, and that is just these huge waves that are happening here in the very beginning, and then it completely dies down and does absolutely nothing in the end. Like, okay, well, why is that? So that's kind of like an interesting metric. So what's going on? So let's go look at that. So let's go open up this save file, and we'll talk about it. So my hunch is the only thing that is an instability is Gleba, and this is back when I used to just let agriculture science rot. And so if we go look at novice and we go look at bot usage, there's a couple things that you'll wind up noticing right now. There is, if we look at spoilage, there's a huge wave of 223,000 per minute spoilage that's getting voided. And if we look down here, you're noticing this general trend of there's a lot of spoilage in this particular area. So what that means is there's also a giant kickoff over on Gleba that happens to start right now as well. You have all of this science that is getting currently generated. And so if we go look at agriculture science, you're seeing that here over the last, like, since we started the actual benchmark, quote unquote, there's the giant spikes of agriculture science that's getting generated, which for the past hour doesn't actually get generated at all. So, whereas on my current base, I have constant agriculture science that is constantly getting created, and it's kind of minimizing the UPS updates over time. So it spreads it out over time, and you wind up just creating a little bit and throwing it into space, and we don't let it actually rot on the planet. What that means is you see this huge amount of bot activity that is coming, kind of drawing in bots from literally every single place on the map, and then just absolutely massively bringing out spoilage. Yeah, that's actually what they're doing. They're bringing from the hub, and they're bringing spoilage all the way to the end here, and requesting the 257,000 spoilage that is currently in the system, and slowly eradicating it. Talk about a crazy amount of bot activity flying around from all of them. We have bots coming from everywhere to help out with us. So that's an interesting thing that I discovered while benchmarking this and trying to understand the difference. I could rerun the benchmark, but I don't know when I should rerun the benchmark for, because you're gonna have this happen once an hour, and it's, I think, kind of fair. So what I'll probably do is this. We go back and look at this chart. What I'll do is I will talk about the UPS, or like the update time, including the whole 36,000 ticks that I measured. But then I'll also include this portion only, which should be a little bit more representative of the better update time that comes from mining productivity. So I'll cut out this, like the first, let's say, I don't know, 16,000 ticks. We'll just cut it down the middle. That's good enough. So 16,000 to 36,000. Still should give us a good amount of time to represent it, but then we can compare that against the 2026 design. All right, that out of the way, because I thought that was kind of interesting. That is a side effect I didn't realize that I used to do in my base that is quite better now. So definitely void your agriculture science somewhere so it doesn't all spoil all at the exact same time, and then you got to go deal with massive amounts of spoilage. So before I just go and show you the results, I want you to take a moment, think through, what do you think the actual performance improvement is? Do you think it's 20% better? Do you think it's 30% better? I'll tell you what. When I was first doing this, I thought, like, if I can get 30%, I'm going to be super satisfied with that score. That's going to mean, like, we've done a whole bunch of net improvements. The base is doing a whole bunch better. That would be fantastic. You got the number in your head? All right, so first off, we're going to start with mining productivity. So for those that are not familiar with these kinds of charts, you're going to see categories on the top for entity update time, control behavior update time, transport line update time, etc. Entity update time is the inserters and assembly machines and what those components are doing in the actual factory. Your control behavior update time is you interacting with and sending circuit signals to entities and them having to go and make a decision off that. Then there's transport line update time. Those are the belts moving items. And then electric heat fluid circuit update time is all multi-threaded stuff, and that is for, you know, the general electric consumption of the entities in the game and the heat on Aquilo for the pipes, etc. Right? So the number that you see on the bottom right-hand corner, that almost 50% decrease, that is the base, the factory from 9 months ago. So what this means is that 9 months ago, the base was, since then, we have increased the performance of the base by 50%. That's a huge deal. When I first saw this number, my jaw kind of hit the floor, because I was saying that what that really means is that effectively we can go and scale up the base by 50%, and we could be running at the exact same UPS that we were running 9 months ago, which means that we've made some serious performance improvements to the base 4 sciences since then. Alright, so we just did a 4 science research. Let's step it up to a 6 science research, and let's talk about physical projectile damage. So here we see actually a very similar story. So the 2026 factory is now 47% better than the 2025 factory. This is kind of, again, just like this is very similar to mining productivity. We've seen like definitely an increase, but we've like gone down by maybe 4%. That isn't as good as like what we saw in mining productivity. But that still is a huge number when you look at that. I'm going to call a couple things out. The control behavior update time across the board just being better in every single one of these is really interesting. So getting away from the direct circuit control and having isolated networks and going down to now a lot of the better clocks that we're using, especially from the clock generator and then other clocks that people have come up with on their own manually, are significantly better than the clocking methods that I was using before. And that really goes to show with like that reduction of 636 microseconds down to 442. But the entity update time, again, is the big drop that you're seeing across the board here. So leveraging direct insertion more and some of the tweaks that we've made for some of the actual the voiding setups for the mining drills has also kind of shown that have improved things overall. So there's a lot. It's just interesting to see holistically how much better this has gotten. Alright, so that was a 6 science research. Let's step it up to a 7. Let's go and do artillery shell range. Now we're actually bringing in another planet. We're going to start bringing in orange science from Vulcanus. So here we start to see that, again, it's 1% different, but it's about the same net improvement. It's 45% better across the board. So again, huge decrease in control behavior update time. Entity update time has the largest differential, reducing from 4,600 microseconds down to 3,000, so that's a huge difference. Then, in general, too, just transport line time has gotten better as well. So, and then electric fluid update time has seen a huge decrease as well. That's kind of biased, if you think about it, because it's not isolated to just these components. That just means that we've reduced the total number of things that we need to be calculating stuff for the electric network. So just reducing entities, cleaning stuff up, getting rid of them that we don't need, we've seen that. So still very, very happy with these results. That's a huge difference. And finally, let's move on to the last science, worker robot speed. This is where we also saw, again, a 46% improvement. The biggest improvement that comes from this is the new designs from Klux that he came out with train voiding on Fulgora. So big kudos to him for that new design that wound up coming out. But again, huge entity update time decrease. Control behavior time is also gone down across the board. And electric update time, and like everything across the board has gotten actually better. So huge improvement there. Again, a 46% reduction while still running the exact same amount of science. Now, you might be saying at this point, all right, A-Buck, that's cool that you got these 50% improvement, but what does that actually mean in terms of the state of your base? So let me break that down. Here's a chart that shows the relative total entity update time along with the raw numbers for each of the different researches that we tested at this new factory for 2026. So you're going to see that on the bottom, we've got mining productivity. And so on the right hand side, the second to last column, you're going to see a UPS number. That means that is in a benchmark, you're going to run it at the absolute max speed you possibly can for the game, and then we record the average UPS that was taken during that time. That means that currently, when I'm running mining productivity, I'm running at a whopping 257 UPS. What that means is, practically, I could go and increase the scale of my base without changing any of the ways that any of the science designs by 4.3x. That means that we could go from effectively producing 5 million science per minute with all the research multipliers that we have to a 20 million effective science per minute base without changing or optimizing anything. That's a pretty huge number. So going through the rest of them, we've got physical projectile damage at 241 UPS. That's a 4x that we still scaling factor that we could go and get to. There's an artillery shell range, which is going to be 210 UPS. That's 3.5x. There's worker robot speed. That's at 176. That's 2.93x that we could increase the scale of the base to. And then finally, there's research productivity coming in at 104 UPS, which means that we could have a 1.7x increase from where we are currently. So let's go and look at finally all the numbers in total. So if you see these, you're going to see always these constant jumps here now to make it really real to everyone. So mining productivity went from 159 UPS up to 257 UPS. Artillery shell range went from 145 to 241. Worker robot speed went from 120 all the way up to 176. And then we don't have a research productivity benchmark because until this week, I haven't been able to run research productivity nonstop. But overall, you can see just like how much of an improvement there is when you're looking at these raw like EPS numbers and the average that we're getting across them. So pretty remarkable difference over 9 months. So that's the end of today's video. I hope you really enjoyed watching this as much as I had fun benchmarking and testing all of these things. Want to say a special thank you to everyone on my Discord that has been helping refine, teaching me wonderful new things about the world of Factorio. I've learned a whole bunch in the last 9 months, and it's been an absolute joy and pleasure to be able to record videos and have people comment on them and have any remote interest in what I'm doing. It's amazing that people are as interested in this kind of stuff as I am, and it's exciting to see just how far we've been able to push Factorio in these last 9 months. I'm excited for the next 9 months and seeing where we're going to get to from there and how the meta will shift, especially once 2.1 eventually comes out. I'm expecting a whole bunch of things to break in this factory, and I'm going to have a really fun time going and completely fixing everything all from scratch again. So these are all really exciting stuff that we have in the future to plan and do. What I want to do next is I want to get back to some of the competitions. I especially want to fix the annoying utility science build that I currently have in this base that I am constantly having to kickstart again. And I am excited for the next rounds of optimizations that we can continue to make. Eventually, I will go ahead and scale up the base, but for right now, I'm going to put a pin in it. So if you're interested in the current save file, I'll have that as a link in the video description below, where you can access it free of charge. I don't believe in paywalls, I never will, so you could just have anything that I do and I create is open source once I believe that it is in a good enough spot to share it. So go check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching and your attention span, as always.